Molweni, colleagues. Molweni. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vuyo Bongela. I serve at Madiba Sport as the director, but today I'm going to facilitate this very interesting conversation. Shame, I think I've put my panelists in a bit of a panic, but I said they must just picture us having coffee on my stoop. We're going to have a conversation on Africanization and decolonization in institutional practice. So I think many conversations have been had in how do we Africanize and decolonize in the academic project, which is the main core business of the university. But how do we do this as party, audit and risk, academic admin, HR, you know? So that's the conversation we're about to have. And happy International Women's Day if you recognize yourself as a woman. I'd like to invite my panelists to the podium to take their seats. First up, he doesn't really like to be called by his portfolio at the university. Mr. Edgar Dikoka, the Registrar of the University, can you please join us? But we always call him the Registrar because he's the Registrar. I was intimidated when I sent extra questions to this next colleague, but I was like, so who am I going to report you to? Because you are the Executive Director of Human Resources, Ms. Nandi Pasishuba, known as Sis Nandi. That is not her name, but we call her Sis Nandi, and I'll possibly allude to why we call her Sis Nandi. I went to this colleague A and I was like, I wonder how you're going to answer these questions. Because internal audit and risk, decolonization, Mr. Sisu said, join on the stage. He's the Senior Director for Internal Audit. And lastly, Dr. Nosipiwo Delubom, the Deputy Director and HOD of Universal Access and Disability Services at our university. I'm going to point out, colleagues, that Mrs. Nosi and I are part of the Student Life and Development Portfolio. I have to mention that. So this mic is going to be off. We're going to be pretending that we're sitting on my lounge, right? One, two, okay. Molweni, panelists. So we've got a couple of minutes to have this conversation. I'm going to start with you, Registrar. So the conversation around Africanization and decolonization is usually focused on knowledge production, right? And learning and teaching, the curriculum, which largely is the academic project. So, but these processes and concepts are always towards systematic change. So now, in light of academic administration, there are contemporary opportunities, obviously, and challenges around higher education. So can you tell us what are the plans or what are you doing in academic administration in response to us as being an African university?
Thank you. That's a big question. I think let me start first to say that one of the functions of the registrar is to identify risk and manage it. You may wonder why am I sitting on this side. It's because there's the door. So if I need to exit, no, it's not what you think. Just in case the VC calls me and I need to take the call. Okay. No, I think in academic administration, as you know, there are rules that apply. And the team understands that those rules need to be applied consistently, it must be applied fairly, and so on. And so if you wander too far away from the rule, then you create a governance failure. And that is what we try to avoid. But I must say this, that you know, post-1994, when we had massification, you know, lots of students coming into higher education, not necessarily only universities, but colleges as well. It was very important, but there was an impact on the system that we're still dealing with today. I think for me, what is important is that, and this, my team will tell you, this is my mantra, that we're building a country. We're not building necessarily only a university or only a province. We are building a country. So wherever our students go once they graduate, that's where you'll find the Mandela Uni DNA. So how does this translate into the services that we provide? One is, of course, we have to understand our students. We can't just apply the rule and say, it says so and therefore, you know, you must do this, that, and the other. What is the context that the student comes from? You know, how can we help? That is the key thing. Not how can we push that away or the student away. Also, in terms of, you know, how do we communicate with students? Even I don't read. This is going out all over the world, right? Okay. And I've already started the sentence, and I can't end it. Even I don't read all the memos that we receive, right? Now, when we communicate with students, you sometimes, in the beginning when I started, it was an email, lots of information, very important information. But now you'll find that we've got other ways of doing that. We give bits and pieces, you know, depending on where we are in the academic year. So you would have noticed in the beginning of the year, we have what we call lungo. Have you seen it? On social media, lungo. This is what registration means. This is what enrollment means. This is what that means, and so on. Bits and pieces so that we help the student understand, especially our first years. They're coming from school. They don't know exactly how the university works and what these terms mean. Now, it's one thing to chase technology and make it work for you. It's another thing to use technology to protect the information that you do have. So in academic administration, we have all of those processes in place. We sign confidentiality agreements with USAF, et cetera, to make sure that student information is, you know, kept safe. So the key thing then, Vuyo, is how we communicate, what we communicate, and how we treat our students.
Thanks, Registrar. So your space is very governed. There's governances to be followed, and the argument would be made that those are rooted in colonial histories and systems. How do we Africanize that? And Shem, I feel sorry for Sizwe because audit and risk.
Yeah, I'm not going to help Sizwe. Okay, here's my question. Who says that those traditions, you know, comes from the colonizer? Because, you know, when we read about how our systems worked in previous societies, in Egypt, in Ethiopia, and so on, those systems existed. We had forms of governance. We had forms of checks and balances. In fact, consensus is not a Western idea. Consensus is an African idea. And the reason why it is an African idea is because in Africa, we want unity. We want to build community together. That is not a Western concept. That is an African concept. So you know, in governance, that's what we go for. We go for consensus, right? Now, in the Constitution, for me, there are 3 words that are most important in that Constitution, for me. Those 3 words are, we the people. That's in the preamble, it's at the start of the preamble. That gives the context to that entire Constitution. So when we talk about, you know, decolonization, yes, we have rules and we have, those were there before anyway. How we apply those rules become important in a humanizing way. Now, there's a paper that was written by, and I can't pronounce the second person's surname. First name is Basheka, other one is Orium Combe, something like that. And the title is Contextualizing Regeneration of Africa's Indigenous Governance and Management Systems and Practices. It gives a beautiful picture of all of that we already have. So I'm not saying that let's kick, the Western traditions out. What I'm saying is, let's bring forward what we already have had before.
Brilliant. So, colleagues in the room who may not know, the Registrar's Department also is responsible for graduation. Now, I'm going to go back to an article that was in the paper when Prof. Moronga in George campus allowed a diploma student to cross the stage after Masters and Ds had been capped. And the media picked it up because it doesn't happen, Mosne. When we were planning for graduation in Gqeberha the following week, some colleagues were really upset by this because it's not done, right? And some of us are like, hey, but she couldn't make it to the venue on time, the transport dropped her, and that question, together with registrar, there's a growing trend. I mean, some people in the room will tell you the UK's end graduation period becomes a time that we really look forward to those social media posts. Because there's dancing, there's Zulu regalia, some cross with their parents. And I remember in one of the planning sessions, a colleague said, we need to watch out that doesn't become the Mandela way of doing things. Now, I sit with conflict. I'm hoping you can guide us, because our chair of council got an on-doc in Glasgow University a couple of years ago, and we were watching online, and I thought this could have been Mandela University, because exactly the way the procession was done and the graduation was done, it's no different from how we do it. So how have we, because I know there's been work done, how have we as Mandela University started to infuse African ways of being and doing in how we celebrate? And do you foresee a time where we allow the dancing and the... Thanks.
Yeah, I think one of the things we must accept is that if you are in a change project, not everybody's going to be happy with you, firstly. Secondly, there may be a time when the majority of people are not happy with you. And I think for me, Madiba knew that at the time when he lived. But to come back to the incident or the graduation in George, what happens is, maybe I should explain the process. What happens is when a student arrives late, my team would, let me know. In this case, we didn't have another ceremony. Because normally what happens is we try and figure out what was the reason. You can't just come late because you got up late. That's not going to fly, right? But for her, what happened was that she had booked a taxi from home to get to the campus. The taxi did not arrive. She frantically then called the SRC president, or the local SRC president there. And to drive from George campus into town takes about 25 minutes. Picked her up, came back. So all of that takes about 40, 45 minutes or 50 minutes or so. And by that time, we were already reading the citation of the doctoral candidate. Now, the protocol is that we do all these certificates, diplomas, degrees, honors, masters, and then we do a doctorate. And the reason for that is that by the time we get to the doctorate, the house is so on fire. Not fire, you know what I mean? I mean, it's energy. Energy is what I meant. Yeah. Energy. There was energy. And also it inspires those undergrads, I want to become, I want to do, Also, we then create a culture of next generation of academics. That's a big picture. And so I get a note to say, we have one student that arrived late. This is the reason. What do we do? I said, let the student come across the stage and inform Professor Moronga, which they did, and he gladly accepted that. Now, that happens in a situation that is extraordinary. It's not something that happens every day. So the message is not, you can come anytime and grad. No, that's not the message. the message is that when we become aware that we can actually help you, we will do so. Remember my first point earlier. And that changed her life. She's now a postgraduate student at our universities. So we look at this on a case-by-case basis. So when you see in a memo that we will look at things on a case-by-case basis, that's what we mean. We want to help, but if you've been negligent, or you've not, followed things the way it was supposed to be, even though we try to help, then we can't help. And that must be very clear. Now, to come to the regalia, now, yes, I've seen it, I like it. The Director of Academic Admin and I have had conversations about how we can make this happen for our university. Our university, you've seen, they are dancing. If it wasn't for my heavy gown that I was wearing on the day, I would also be dancing. But that thing's so heavy, I can't get my moves out. So we allow that, but within limits. And here's the limit. So when you cross the stage, by the time you get to the Chancellor or the Vice Chancellor, we allow you to do your thing, right? But then we've got to bring the house down so that we can hear the name of the next person. Yeah. Because their family is there too. They want to hear that name just as much as your family heard your name, right? And sometimes they just want to walk across. They don't necessarily want to dance, and that's also fine. And I think we've got to understand that that is how it happens. Now, of course, all of this is timed. Last year we had over 7,200 graduates, 26 ceremonies that took the whole of April. So it has to be like that, right? And we make those announcements in the beginning. But to come back to the regalia, we want to change it, to make it, more of us. When I say us, I mean within the Eastern Cape. This is our context. I know that the University of KwaZulu-Natal had those done a few years ago. The University of the Western Cape has done it as well for their context. And it's a process that one has to go through. But we are not ready to do that yet, because there are other things that we need to do it. So we're not closed to the idea. We're actually very open to the idea. But you've got to wear the black gown at the moment, right? Over whatever you are wearing on the day, because of certain protocols that are in place. And then, we take it from there. By the way, you would notice that the University of the Western Cape is the only university in the country where the doctoral gown is blue and not red.
Thank you, Registrar. I think maybe just to add, the university had a transformation committee of graduation, and it did a survey asking students do they not want to wear the gown. And the majority of students said, let's keep graduation with the gown. Yeah. So thank you, Registrar. And as I move to Sis Nandi. Thank you. This look you're giving me is intimidating, but I will not be intimidated. Sis Nandi, I can't start questions to you and not acknowledge that right now there's a group of our colleagues who have down tools. So I think we need to bring that in the room. And my first question to you is, so post-1994, a lot of focus in HR has been about employment equity, changing the demographics of the university. And colleague, please do this exercise. Go to Memo and look at the new staff complement of the university. It will show that we really have come far. But obviously, there are other issues, right? So how have we borrowed, and human resources is such a governed, space. How have we borrowed from African ways of, knowledge systems, and also understanding that this is a human resources space to govern our university from a human resources perspective?
Thanks for you. I think the first point that you've raised of some of your colleagues that have down tools, I think they are exercising their democratic right, and as a university, we support, them doing that. The second point for me, my input is going to be informed by experience. The first point for me, it starts with knowledge production. The practices of human resources that we have, they start with knowledge production and dissemination and how that knowledge is utilized. I missed the input from the faculties in terms of that area. So our practices in human resources have evolved from an Anglo-Saxon, Eurocentric strategies and ideologies. And therefore, it have to start there. There are scholars that have begun early on to look into Africanization of management and the issues of managerialism. But as I'm still studying, I come across very few scholarship that talks to that. There are scholars. For an example, I'm coming to how as a university can innovate. For an example, I have the privilege of being in human resources and industrial psychology and organizational psychology. And with the evolution of HR, industrial and organizational psychology has been termed the mother of HR. And I sometimes wonder why it was not the father of HR, you know. Now, you come to South Africa and you look at how HR has been taught. I mean, I'm old, so I've been taught in that era where I'm not going to name universities, one university was the center of training human resources and IOPs. And totality of the faculty, very white dominated, the dominant narrative, the books that were being taught, you know, influencing the strategies of the then South African government, you know, until, we get into the change and the Clemens Kadali fighting for the rights of the workers. So you are looking at an HR that is evolved from that era and still dominantly, you know, from those dominant narratives. So for an example, as a student at the time, I was mesmerized when I had a professor who made me to love HR because that professor made HR to be relatable. And made HR to be relatable. I remember we had a huge discussion about salary and wage negotiations. I'm using that example because we are in that season at the moment. And I think we were very few that could understand, and it was a white elderly professor. I could understand and appreciate when we were talking about collective bargaining and how the workers are using their collective power, you know, to put together their issues, and how the negotiations take place and the shifts that take place. And then he brought in the concept of lobola. I was thinking my other things, but when he spoke about the concept of lobola, I became awake, you know, because he began to say that negotiations, consensus building, putting this, shifting, and he related it to lobola. And by that time, I was not lobolad. But when I was lobolad, that took place. And at the end of the day, the two families reached an agreement. But when they started, they were far apart. You can imagine my family wanted, I mean, you look at me, you know. You can imagine my family, how many cows and a horse with everything that goes with a horse. you know, and that other family, you know. But at the end of the day, they became one family, and I was handed over. So for me, that class became relatable because it spoke to what I know and the implementation of what I know into the workplace, you know, so relatability and context. Now, coming to the university, there are scholars, one of the scholars you've mentioned that I've read about as well. There are scholars at UK's and that look at the innovative ways of applying our indigenous knowledge systems and values. And I just pick up on one because the values of the university have got that African philosophy. Yeah. Our university has got a value of Ubuntu, which is an African philosophy, which for me, I think, starting from the known to the unknown will be better. And that when we developed our policies and practices at HR, we start affirming the African philosophy of Ubuntu and how it's intended and how it is characterized. That when we think, when we plan, when we design, when we engage and consult, when implement, evaluate, and lessons learned, we center the African philosophy of Ubuntu as a point of start. You know, for me, it makes it manageable.
Marcus's short answer. There is the employment, there is the disciplinary code of the university.
Yes.
Got a colleague, Nyani, they must be disciplined. How do I do that in Ubuntu? You know, because at the end of the day, there is a code, it's a dismissal, first warning, last warning, dismissal. How do I do that within the, you know, the ambit of, I'm still practicing Ubuntu, but uzawuxothwa?
Yes, I think, Vuyo, it is in the approach. It doesn't mean because you exercise Ubuntu, awuzuxothwa.
Xotha means
like
fire.
You're not going to dismiss. Dismissing is not that you are not implementing Ubuntu, but it means that you are going to look at the case on its merit. You are going to allow the employee to be represented. You are going to investigate in an impartial manner. You are going to look at the facts. You are going to see whether for this particular transgression, to what extent it violates the values of the university. I always say to my team, if it's not in the policy, look at the values of the university. How do they assist you to make a decision? You know, because the policy doesn't say it in clear black and white.
Perfect, thank you. Sis Nosi? Sis Nosi is the HOD of Universal Access and Disability Services at the university. Now, in our ways of being and doing at the university, Sis Nosi, how far are we from, when you hear Africanization and decolonization, and your lived experience with the students that you assist to either enter the university, exit the university, live with other students in the university and staff members?
Oh, thank you, Vuyo. Good day, colleagues. Maybe let me have the opening statement that says, we are coming afar, we are still journeying, we are not perfect, but there are critical factors that we need to understand when we want to Africanize and decolonize, and linking it with the disability inclusion. Now, we need to decolonize our minds and shy away from perceiving disability through the lens of medical model. Because basically, when we are referring to the universal access and disability inclusion, and we say we are the Africans. Now, as the Africans, we are the community. Then that means, despite the disability that I have, I belong to the community. I want to be recognized. I don't want to be excluded. Now, there is an issue, Vuyo, of access and inclusion. And most of the time, we put those concepts in one sentence. We can have an access for persons with disabilities in the university, but at the same time, excluding them, not recognizing them that they are part of the family. In other words, if our mind is decolonized, we will understand that they are part of the family. They do not belong to US, for instance. Whatever we are doing, talking about sport, we need to be transformative, understanding that they need to be part of the sport. Talking about co-curricular programs in the university, they need to be involved. And it is us that can make them to be involved when we do not have that mentality to say that they do not have capacity, maybe. So as the university that is carrying the name of the icon, we need to understand how Tatu Mandela perceive disability. For instance, when I was preparing, I came across of a speech that Tatu Mandela said in 2004 in a disability conference. I want to quote him. He said, "We cannot claim to reach anywhere near to where a society should be in terms of practical equality of the disabled. We continue to try." That was 2004. 20 years ago.
We're still trying.
We are still trying even today. Even today, we are still waiting for a person to say, no, let us practice inclusion. For instance, when I was stepping here, I had to jump because there is no rail, there is no ramp. Now, we need someone who is going to remind us to say, let us practice universal access, because if there is universal access, it means all of us, we have an access, despite mentioning that, no, we have this little number of persons with disabilities when it comes to students and staff. Another thing that I want to mention, Vuyo, is that we need to understand that it is not the question of demeaning philanthropy towards persons with disabilities. It is not for them to adapt to the so-called dominating world of those who declare that they are not disabled. But it is for the dominating part to adapt to them. In other words, we need to understand the humanity, to learn of the richness of how human life is diverse, to recognize the presence of disability in our human midst as an enrichment of diversity. Fortunately, diversity is our value at the university. But my argument is that we need to practice this, not to say or to read it, but to always reflect to ourselves. Are we doing what we say we are doing? Do we mean what we are doing?
Enkosi Madlamini. I'm saying decide aya because he's sober, we've got a short time, and Mos is advocating for audit and risk that we can decolonize it. Do I have grace, Jenny? The 5-minute grace, and maybe it's a conversation. No, not now. After Sizwe. I grew up in the rural Transkei, right, where Usindiswa, who lived next door, I now understand is on the autism spectrum. Usindiswa has a family. Usindiswa ungumame bhaki, she's a manyano woman. So my question is, why we're not seeing that in the spaces that we live in, and we're other? So if we've got time, maybe you can answer me. Sizwe, transformative potential of audit and risk processes in the context of Africanization and decolonization. What has the university done? Oganye, what's there? What is the potential? What has been done in the world? Because when I think of your space, systems.
Yes, thank you. No, I think let me start perhaps with his historical perspective, because I think as auditors we go to the root, and then whatever solution that we provide is a solution that is aligned with the root that we have identified. The internal audit profession on its own, I think it's a product of U.S. imperialism, and also so because it originated in the United States. And in the main, it was to manage their economic expansion on the basis that they wanted to be assured that the stakeholder interest is preserved, and that therefore be able to maximize the profit through that internal audit process. And it has since been exported to the other side of the world, including in South Africa. And it has since increased massively, but it still has all the features of colonialism. And the reason why it still has the features of colonialism is because we have what is called is professional standards. And professional standards dictate for you what you need to do, and without dismantling, therefore, the colonial nature of those particular standards, it's very difficult for you to be in a space where you're completely decolonized. But I think the space that is not without being challenged. For example, in the African context, we do have what we currently term the African Federation of the Institute of Internal Auditors. And in the main, we wanted to ensure that there's an African voice that is being heard, and also wanted to ensure that that voice is not just a voice that replicates the Western knowledge systems, but want to infuse the cultures of Africa so that we have the profession that responds to the African problems that we're facing. And I think here in South Africa, for example, because part of colonialization, that's what is called certifications. Certifications in the main, I think they speak to your understanding of the standards, no matter they define you or do not define you. In South Africa, we've gone an extra mile of developing our own certifications that speaks to the challenges of South Africa. And those certifications, they were really registered through SACA, and we have produced a number of internal auditors that play to that particular space. So now, in order for you to decolonize, you must understand, particularly in the internal audit profession, you must understand that there was also a process, even post-colonialism, where we continued to take some of the features of colonialism and included them through the apartheid system. And part of that was exclusion of certain racial and gender groups, not necessarily because they were not smart enough to do internal auditing, but it was because it was a profession that was a preserve of a few. But I think over time, South Africa have de-racialized in a very serious manner, and we have also de-gendered the aspect of internal auditing. As I speak, there are a lot of women leaders in internal auditing. They're doing very good work. There are a lot of black leaders in internal auditing. They're doing very good work. So, and I think we're in the process of changing, and we still continue to intensify that kind of a change that we want to see. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, colleagues. I'll take 3 questions. 1, 2, 3. You can take the mic. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. That side is covered.
My question is to the second speaker. You mentioned that your lecturer putting a concept in class in an African context helped you understand and helped you be interested in what was happening in class. So do you think that it's important for our teachers to put especially profession education into African context? And do you believe that it doesn't only foster understanding, but it can also have an impact in how our future professionals conduct and carry out processes in their future workplaces?
Great, thank you. The gentleman.
Good morning. My name is Samkelo Mkwanazi. I'm going to ask a question pertaining, I don't have the words to phrase this, but pertaining on how do you guys as a leadership, especially a Black leadership, deal with the people who are not at idiom with your ideas. I'm going to make an example of the Black Vice Chancellor of UCT, where she talks about how when she tried to change how things are done in UCT, there was consistent pressure. There were people writing about her, alleging her of incompetency as a Black person in leadership. So my question is, how do you guys deal with those people who then try to oppose what she tried to incorporate in changing how things are done?
Edgar, can you take that question, please? Thank you. And then we've got Prof. Kiet right at the end.
I don't know. Good morning.
Mike behind you.
Oh, for those that can't hear. Good morning, guys. So for me, fundamentally, plan fundo Africanization-Decolonisation, I'm seeing something versus something. A struggle, a fight. And Kulizwe that is consistently evolving. Owamumbuzo is, are we as Africanists still trying to fight colonialism as ideas in the past versus are we still considering Africanism in the old tense and colonialism in the old tense? Because abantwana bethu xa graduate, they want to be identified in certain ways. They fight like battles with us in ways that we didn't fight with our parents. So this battle, I will call it, are we fighting it in the past or are we fighting it in the present?
Thank you. And then Prof. Kiet. Who's going to take that question? Because I think we can contextualize it, right?
Thanks, Vuyo. Thank you, panel. Very, very interesting discussion. In fact, it's way beyond what I expected, so thanks for the prep and the thoughts that has gone into it. It's a general question, so anybody can respond. The one is that both our legal framework makes provision for the emerging interface between culture and modern law, policy, regulation, and the way in which the two should keep on restructuring one another. Now, in a previous job at a university, I had a few cases of students that are being called. This is just one example. One can have other examples in HR as well. And then, of course, the residency period of that student is not taken into consideration with regard to the absence of the student from campus, because you have to write these long letters, so that the student can continue with the study when they return, because it's been added to their residency program. Now, my intuitive feeling would have been that's a perfect example of a cultural practice that should have landed in the policy spaces of the university for students to be exempted from the normal application of residency periods. And the same, Nandi, in your case, it would have been for HR with regard to whether we have flexible HR regimes that respond to the cultural responsibilities that are placed on so many of our colleagues in different aspects of their lives. And whether the screening of our policy regime at the present moment does not simply follow a broad stroke, which have been inherited through a regulatory frame that more or less screens out the cultural experiences or the cultural diversities of the members within a community like a university. There's no judgment in the question. I'm just throwing it out as part of my own experiences.
Thanks, DVC. Edgar?
I'm assuming you are referring to the question that you had referred to me.
Engos.
All right. Right. And if I understood the question correctly, you were asking about how do we, as a leadership team, support one another, even though we may differ. Now, when you're in leadership, you're not necessarily going to agree with everything everyone says. And I think, the maturity of the leadership team is measured by how one engages, on various issues, whether you agree or disagree or, decide to rather just abstain from things. Our approach is to engage. Our approach is to persuade. Our approach is to, look at what the numbers are telling us. What is the story that comes out of that? Our approach is not necessarily to go directly to let's vote on something. Remember my comment about the consensus. And I remember there's one meeting where, not necessarily it wasn't a leadership team meeting, but it was another meeting at another place where, the question was asked, we acknowledge your point that you made. Are you happy with the decision? And the person says, I'm not happy, but I can live with it. That is what consensus brings. That is what engagement brings. And I think, as a leadership team, that is what we do very well, is that engagement, that type of discussion that we have, so that when we leave there, we leave as a team. We come in as a team, we leave as a team. We're not divided. And that is very important. So a lot of some of the governance failures in the sector, as you have noticed, you've read the newspapers and so on, is around where those relationships fail. It may be between, the leadership team amongst themselves, or between the governance structures and the leadership team, that kind of thing. We work very hard to keep those relationships intact and strong, dependable, trustworthy.
Thank you, Registrar. Do you have any comments to Prof. Keart's comment?
Prof. Keart had a very difficult question because it is interspersed with a regulatory framework that we have to follow. So in South Africa we have laws and we have procedures and regulations that we need to follow when we review policies. I take the point about when we look at these policies, are we engaging with the matters that we currently see as peripheral? Can't we bring them into the spaces? And that's what we are doing now. We're going through a big policy review process across the university, all sorts of policies. And the thing about policies is a policy is not something that is cast in stone. It's not 2 tablets with 12 laws on it. A policy is something that when you implement and you realize certain portions need to be amended quickly because it had unintended consequences, you do so. Just because the policy says that you review it 3 years hence doesn't mean that you now wait 3 years because your issue is now. So as we review these policies, we will incorporate some of those things that Professor Keart has highlighted. In fact, we have already done some of that with key governance policies, but nothing stops us from reviewing them the next year if we realize there's a problem here.
Perfect. Thank you, Edgar. Sis Nandi, the lobola question, and can you please maybe also touch on our posture in the Africanization versus the decolonization? Are we forward-looking or kanye sijonge emva?
Okay, thanks. Before I respond, I think what I liked about the Indaba, there are so many things that made me not to sleep in February. Very sleepless nights. And the invitation to decolonization, Africanization, Indaba was one of them. Coming to Professor Kiet's question, because for me, as I was looking at Africanization, what aspects of Africanization are positive and what aspects of what we call Africanization are negative. And I wrestled with that being a woman. You know, when we talk culture, Professor Kiet, what culture are we talking about, you know, in terms of the policies? For me, the question of that has been asked, for me, I'm looking at the present and the future. What has happened in the past has happened, but it must be a lesson for us so that we don't carry what of the past was bad into the present and informing the future. So that's how I look at it. And then in terms of the flexibility and embracing, you know, our policies, understanding and being relatable to the different cultures and subcultures. So at some point, you've got to create a balance. And when you run an organization, you have to be intentional. First and foremost, we want to look at our constitution as a country. Is our policy not in violation of the constitution? Which is another debate that I had with a colleague to say, is our constitution a decolonized constitution? You know? Because I have got some challenges with some aspects which I don't think are decolonized in the constitution, but maybe it's for another Indaba. So now, my point then, Prof. Kate, is that there are diverse dominant cultures and subcultures, and we've got our own organizational culture. And as a university, we've articulated our values as a personality of what we want to be. And therefore, when we formulate our policies, we need to use our agreed upon values as a dipstick and as a filter. If our policy does pass one of our organizational values. But then lastly, in policy implementation in the space of HR, consistency. Therefore, you need to find a balance in being flexible and accommodating different types of cultures, you know, and how do you remain consistent in the application of your rules and policies. That's what I would say. Then the last one, there was a question around professional from the young colleague. Yes. I think in preparation of future professionals and in understanding that in the HR space and in the industrial psychology space that I'm coming from, that's why we've been very conscious. I'm part of a very conscious group of professionals where we formed a Black IOP caucus, where we are fighting for training of students across the spectrum, because the training has been predominantly, especially in the IOP space, affording access to other racial groups. I mean, if I may put it that way. So we are fighting for inclusion, for diversity, for broadening and opening the profession first.
In the IOP?
Industrial and organizational psychology, which she was speaking to. So our continuous professional development initiatives are imbued, we are beginning to imbue Africanization. You know, if you do your work, how do you include the African perspective and philosophy in yourself, in the discipline as we go ahead? So it's part of continuous professional development.
Thank you. Fortunate, 3 minutes, please. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Sisnosi? Kosisnanti.
Okay, to respond to the question that we have asked Vuyo, previously, when we grew up, disability was taken as a curse, and families. Hence, we did not know that Uno Radio has ASD. And they were part of the community, right? But they were excluded in the education system because uthathwa ngoba uyagula. She cannot do anything without acknowledging that even if that girl has an ASD, she has the skills, she can do something. If she is not mainstreamed in the mainstream school, but there's something that she can do. Now, coming to our time now, persons who have invisible disabilities are scared to disclose them because they moved with that mentality that if I disclose my disability, my next door is going to discriminate me, or maybe I will be excluded from the program at the university. So maybe in conclusion, we need to understand that it is our responsibility to involve them as part of the community so that in the residences, they are not afraid to disclose to the roommate that I have this type of condition. So maybe when you see this, don't be afraid. They need support in a nutshell. Thank you.
Sizwe, are we looking forward? Are we looking back? Are we taking lessons from the colonialism structures and Africanizing?
Yes, no, I think on the question whether we must colonize through the history, the past lenses or through the present lenses, I would probably say that let's just decolonize, looking back to the past. In the process of that, I think when we talk about decolonialization, we need to change the form and not necessarily to change the content. We appear to be talking too much about changing the content, and we forget about changing the form. And therefore, it means to say that we are just in the process of transforming, but we are not too radical about what negating, what disrupted our future, our values, what disrupted our language, what disrupted our knowledge development systems. Thank you.
Colleagues, that concludes this panel discussion. Thank you very much for your participation. To the panelists, I must say it is energizing to hear from what the university terms as PASS, which is the professional administration angle, and not only from Sismuki's space of the academic project, because some of us grapple as we sit in the spaces that how can we take and borrow what is being done in the academic space and infuse it in ways of being and doing in the spaces that we occupy in the university. Thank you.